Hey everyone! On today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Umut Alemdar back on the show, and today we're talking about Qakbot. Now, if you don't know what Qakbot is, it started as a banking Trojan and it has grown into a whole different thing. It's a piece of software that's very malicious, very tricky, and can do a lot of different things for threat actors. So we're going to be focusing that on the show today, and we got lots more coming up next on the Security Swarm podcast. Well, everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and with me, I've got a familiar face. I've got Umut Alemdar back on the show today. How's it going, Umut?
Glad to be here, Andy. I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, you're becoming a regular guest on the show. I'm gonna have to put you on as a co-host on all of the imagery and descriptions. But you're always a wealth of information. It's great to have you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us about what do we got on the docket for today. It looks like Qakbot, right?
Exactly. Yes. Exciting.
It is. It's a really interesting topic, and I mean it. I always feel weird saying that about, a malicious piece of software like Qakbot, but from a purely academic standpoint, it is interesting, right? It is interesting to kind of look at it and see how it works, right? But I feel like this is a good segue from our previous episode that you and I did, where we focused on just botnets in general and why they continue to come back. So for those of you that haven't seen or listened to that episode, depending on what platform you're using, I'll be sure to get a link to that in the show notes. It's one of the previous episodes. I want to say episode 3 or 4. Don't quote me on that because my memory's terrible. But yeah, I'll be sure to link that in the show notes. You guys can check that out too. But as opposed to talking about botnets in general, we're going to focus specifically on Qakbot today. And I guess one thing that maybe we should start with, Umut, before we get into our official outline here is I've talked with some people who, where we were kind of wondering about the name. Is it Qakebot? Is it Qakbots? I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. Do you know like the official? I guess only the owner knows the official name for it, right?
Yeah. That's the difficulty with that. I mean, internally, we also talk about Qbot, for example, to keep it short. But there are many aliases to Qakbot or Qakbot. In the end, just call it whatever you want, as long as people know that it's around Qakbot, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I guess that's what we'll go with. So Qakbot. So with that, now that we have I guess we're going the Webster's dictionary route here, right? Here's the word, here's how to say it. Now, what's the definition? And if you could give us just a quick rundown of what Qakbot is, Umut, just so everybody is kind of on the same page as we start the discussion here.
What I do or what I love to do is compare it to Emotet. For me, Qakbot has a very similar career path compared to Emotet. Qakbot initially started as information stealer way back in 2007, and over time it developed to a multi-modular malware. So it is capable of also loading other malware, also ransomware, for example. Once it infected a system, it is capable of doing remote access activities also on the affected client. So right now we would rather classify it as a stage 2 malware. When once the system is infected, it is capable of downloading more malicious payload.
Right. So it's almost like a malware platform. Like you said, it's modular, right? So it can be set up to do a number of different things. And to me, I think that's what makes it so malicious, right? Is because when you look at most malware that's out in the wild, I mean, they're really designed to do, one or two things. But when you've got something like this that's modular and can be molded and shaped to do whatever, the threat actor of the day wants it to do, makes it a little bit more difficult to protect against. And, I guess, I think you mentioned it, is it kind of got its start as a banking malware, right? If I remember correctly, that's what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the creators kind of determined that, hey, this is working pretty well. Maybe we should have it do A and B and C and X, Y, and Z, right? So, okay, well, we've got kind of a high level overview of really what it is. I think what's most important in these types of discussions is to really understand what it is and how it works. So, can you kind of run us through what the typical attack chain for Qakbot looks like?
Sure. As I mentioned, it's a stage 2 malware. So initially, the victim needs to click either on a malicious link or a malicious attachment to start a document, or maybe it download a script that downloads Qakbot to the system. Once the Qakbot is executed, it then is capable of downloading more ransomware or other payloads that can be used to remote control the victim system. So basically, what we also described, this whole Qakbot activities is all attributed to a threat actor group that we call TA551, also known as Gold Cabin. And they operate this since 2018, 2017. And since then, they work also on the delivery scheme, on how to initially deliver the Qakbot or the script that downloads Qakbot, or the document, for example, the malicious links. And they use the reason why this is so sophisticated is they use different kinds of techniques. So really, the malware as it is just multi-modular. But what's dangerous is how they deliver it. They use, for example, techniques like conversation hijacking. So once Qakbot infected a system, it starts uploading email conversations to a server. And these conversations are then also used for attacks. So maybe once your system is infected, 2 years or 3 years from now, you will suddenly get to see emails from a conversation partner that got infected, and they simply attach a malicious document to it and just 1 or 2 sentences also to the top of the email, like, hey Andy, I have this email for you, or click on this attachment, for example. So this is absolutely legit, right? Because it was a conversation that existed between you and the partner. And because of that, the success rate, the click rate for the malware is also quite high. And we also see other delivery tricks that help bypass antivirus engines, for example. In April, there was a large campaign using OneNote documents. And by default, some common antivirus engines trust certain file types, for example, the OneNote document, because they don't believe that OneNote files can be exploited. But in this case, the threat actor group actually embedded scripts into OneNote documents, and when the user clicked on certain images, the scripts were executed and the malicious payload were then downloaded to the system. So it's really sophisticated. What we also see, so Andy, you need to stop me if I talk too much.
No, keep going. This is great.
That the threat actors change the delivery tactics between campaigns. So as we advance, we see different kind of tactics. What we also saw in the past, in the beginning of the year in February, is that they send scripts, for example, encapsulated in zip archives, but the zip archive was encrypted and the email included the password to the zip archive. And this also helped the threat actors to bypass antivirus solutions by simply encrypting it, making the source code of the malware more or less inaccessible for the antivirus engine, so it couldn't be scanned in the end, and this helped them bypass a lot of security solutions.
Boy, there's a lot to take in there, and a lot of, I guess I would say, mischievousness to make it work and make it spread. I look back to the OneNote documents, and I mean, I get why some antivirus engines would assume that, OneNote files can't be malicious, but I guess if I was going to go out and I was going to start my own antivirus company today, I would make no assumptions at this stage of the game in the industry, because I mean, the thing I always look at when I think about this is macros in Office documents, right? For the longest time, we as an industry were yelling at Microsoft like, hey, you guys got to do something about macros. You got to do something about macros. And they finally did, right? I think it was summer of last year. Boy, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but I guess it was. Summer of last year, they finally made the decision to, by default, macros are disabled. But botnet operators and malware creators are still finding ways around it, right? So the couple of techniques that I've seen is either they've pivoted to some other attachment type, like you mentioned, zip files, or LNK files. I see that used once in a while too.
Yeah.
Or I've seen them getting clever with like Word and Excel documents where they will fashion the document in such a way that it looks like there's a legit Microsoft Office message at the top of the document, with that like weird yellow kind of tint to it, right? That says, hey, to get the full functionality of this document, please move it to the templates folder, right? Where macros are allowed to execute from. So, yeah. So when I just think about the different ways that they're trying to get around security systems, it's just always fascinating to me. And I think the other thing with Qakbot, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit too, is when I think about malware, threat actors usually have to put forth some sort of effort to get a target organization infected with it, right? But Qakbot, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way that it's fashioned, it kind of has the ability to spread on its own, right?
Exactly. Since it uses conversation hijacking techniques, it also has access to contact address books, and
Right.
it can also more or less reach whole conversation threads in the email, right? So it is capable of using this information to attack target organizations, but it spreads through infections. So the more people are infected, the more we will get to see Qakbot and also targets.
And and again, I always feel weird saying this, but that's kind of an ingenious an ingenious design decision on their part, because they don't have to exert any effort in infecting a target organization. They just put the initial infection out, or a couple initial infections out on the web, and they just sit there and wait for it to start reporting in from whatever organization it ends up in, right? So I mean that. Yeah, if I put my old sysadmin hat back on, it's always that's one of those things that makes you lose sleep at night, right? So
exactly, yeah. And we talked about this too in one of the previous podcast iterations, right? So this is the whole business model. So as you can imagine, Qakbot infects a lot of systems, and it is capable of reading the system information too, right? The local domain, for example. And depending on that, it can, since it is also capable of downloading additional payloads to the system, the threat actors can also sell this kind of data and this access, right? So if there's another threat actor group that wants to target a specific industry, or maybe a specific enterprise, and Qakbot has access to them, they would simply market it so that the additional payload from the second threat actor group can be deployed to the target.
It's really crazy to think about, because now the gears are churning for me here, and I'm thinking like it enables so many different attacks, right? So like you said, they're selling Qakebot services to other threat actors, and okay, maybe I'm a threat actor and I want to target the defense space for some reason, and okay, yeah, give me the organizations you have in the defense space, right? And I pay a fee and I get access to it. Right now, I could install my own piece of malware that provides remote access. And then from there, I do lateral movement, privilege escalation, and, get to a point to where I own that organization, basically, right? And I mean that... Wow. It's, like I said, I always feel weird kind of... saying, hey, that's interesting. Oh, that's kind of neat because it's a piece of malware, but I think it just highlights how sophisticated attacks have become in the last 5-10 years, right? It speaks to their capabilities and really speaks to the threat that we as an industry are having to deal with, right? And I guess that brings me to the next part of our conversation, and that is mitigation and defense strategies. And you mentioned it a couple of times that there's a lot baked into Qakebot specifically designed to get around security software. But I guess, to start this part of the conversation, what would be your recommended practices for the sysadmins in the trenches, the SOCs out there, the people that are having to worry about this? What's their way forward in defending against this?
Obviously, first we have to look at the first stage of the delivery, and this appears through email, through phishing emails, for example. And to combat Qakbot, it is really essential to invest into sophisticated email security solutions because the attack is so sophisticated, right? So they use existing conversations for email delivery and so on. And I call them legacy solutions probably would not detect this kind of conversation hijacking attack.
So when you say legacy solution, sorry to jump in. Yeah, when you say legacy solution, that would be like your historical signature or hash-based detection methods, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Continue.
And the use of AI is really necessary to combat these Qakbot campaigns. These campaigns emerge quite often. What we also see between campaigns is that they utilize, for example, when the payload is delivered through a malicious URL, we see more than thousands of compromised sites between campaigns, and these lists grow over time. So it looks like they have a way to infect websites, or they make use of vulnerabilities in maybe WordPress frameworks to deploy their malicious code on a web page, for example. So you will never get to remediate or detect the issue through signatures or hash-based solutions. You really need to have sophisticated solutions like email clustering, machine learning, and so on in place to detect these emergent campaigns. Besides the sophisticated email security solution, you also need security awareness training. So really, it's for the user in the end when when Qakbot makes it through the email security solution to decide whether to click on a link or to open an attachment and so on. And this is where we highly recommend our security awareness training. It is really necessary to teach the user to not click on unverified links. So if a link looks really fishy, for example, just don't click on it. The same goes for attachments, right? If you send me an attachment and I don't expect it, and it's on top of that encrypted or something like that, it's extra fishy, right? So for me, coming from a security background, I wouldn't click on it. I would get in touch with you through mobile or some other channels that we established and ask you, hey, Andy, did you really send this to me? And just get your acknowledgement. Yeah, right. So these two things are really key points to defend against Qakbot.
I think that's a good point because I mean, like you said, your legacy detection methods are no good against this type of attack, right? And ultimately, stuff is going to sneak through in some way, shape, or form. And then the user's really the last line of defense at that point. Because, I mean, once the payload's in, all bets are off. You have no idea what they've done inside the environment once the malware's been present, right? I mean, you can't just assume that, just this endpoint was infected and stop at that. I mean, now it's like, okay, I know they're going to try and do lateral movement. I know they're going to try and, get to data, get to servers, at that point, it's a full-blown security incident, right? So that security awareness training, I feel like we hit on that point in a lot of the episodes of this show. But I mean, it just goes to show like how important that component of any organization's security posture is becoming, right? And I mean, like you said, end users, I think we as an industry have done a good job of at least getting them started with basic security awareness training. There's a lot of organizations that don't do it yet and should. That's a whole other discussion. But I think at least the end users I talk with are starting to become a little bit more aware. But that said, if they received an email from me on a thread from 2 years ago, hey, what is Andy looking for? We were talking about this thing 2 years ago. Your average user is probably not going to question that a whole lot, and it's just really sneaky and malicious and all those things, right? Well, in terms of, we talked about mitigation and defense strategies. Where does this go in the future? I mean, like we talked about earlier, Qakbot started as a banking Trojan, right? And it's kind of evolved into this really dangerous, malicious thing. I can't imagine they stop here. I mean, what do you think the next step is? They're just going to keep going, right?
Honestly, yes. So we've seen some very creative approaches to email delivery. And in the following months and also in the following years, we expect them to become more creative. So there's probably just a framework that can be abused. They will find out about this. The effect actor group behind Qakbot actually does their research. They try to find new ways to deliver it and so on, right? And my prediction is also that they will go forward to deploy a system comparable to Emotet or offer Qakbot to other threat actors in a larger scale, so that they can also use it for delivery of additional payloads, ransomware, or to exfiltrate data that is maybe relevant to the threat actor groups and so on. So this is all a possibility. Creativity has no ends. So in regards to email delivery, and given that Qakbot is well maintained, unfortunately, these high differences, high variations in the email deliveries will go on.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how closely they resemble a traditional software company, right?
Mhm.
So obviously, the goal for them is to make money, right? And in order to do that, they need to reach a wider audience of customers, quote unquote customers, for those can't see me doing the quotations on screen. But I think we talked about this in a previous episode too, is the fact that they like to try and provide the best service possible to their customers, right? And their customers being other threat actors, which is a really weird way to look at this, but it's the way it is, right? So
yeah.
Oh, boy, that's interesting. Well, I know we've talked about a lot in the last 22 minutes. Is there anything we're missing? I get the feeling we're going to talk about Qakebot again more in the future because it keeps changing and morphing. But is there anything we've missed that you can think of, Umut, or do we cover it pretty well?
Yeah, I think for the initial overview of Qakbot, we covered it quite well. So obviously, Qakbot is a fully featured malware. It is capable of doing a lot of things. It is capable of also something that we did not mention. It is capable of evading antivirus solutions, like that's running on the endpoint system. It is capable of also evading sandbox systems, for example. So it's really a sophisticated malware. People put a lot of effort into it. Unfortunately for us,
Right.
to make sure that it is successful in its mission. And because of that, really, when you need to combat Qbot, it's very important that you invest into a security solution that's also quite advanced, that is also quite frequently updated, so it can keep up with the newest threats, right? And these
Right.
updates are not in regards to signatures and hashes. It needs to be a modern solution. So it needs to be capable of analyzing email campaigns, emerging campaigns through AI, machine learning techniques, and so on, to always also be able to detect never before seen threats and delivery methods.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, actually, is you need a security solution that can leverage AI. And I think this is a whole other episode to be had, is the fact that I think right now with ChatGPT taking the news cycle by storm, right? I think there's a lot of panic and discussion about how threat actors are using ChatGPT and AI, right? Which, don't get me wrong, there's some genuine concern there, but guess what? Blue team can use AI too. And I think that's an important distinction to make here, in that, a lot of security vendors like us, we do have the ability to use AI to detect kind of these more fluid threats like Qakebot. So, all right, well, Umut, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today. It's always great having you on the show. So I'm sure we'll be seeing you again here soon. But thank you for your time as always, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely. And those of you watching, appreciate you joining us for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast. If you found value in today's show, be sure to hit that subscribe button or smash the like button if you're on YouTube. I just can't help myself from saying that, right? Because, it's the YouTube thing. Anyway, we talked a lot about some advanced threat protection stuff, some security awareness service stuff that's contained in our stack here at Hornet Security. If you're interested in any of that, I'll be sure to link that below in the show notes. You can check that out in case you're interested. Other than that, thanks for watching today. Stay safe out there and have a good one.